Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Relaxing. Tonight we slip quietly into a Roman winter where the marble gleams, the streets echo, and the cold has a way of settling into your bones long before you even notice it. You stand at the doorway of a Roman house expecting warmth, expecting comfort, and instead you feel that slow creeping chill that seems to rise from the stone itself. It is not dramatic, it is not a blizzard, but it lingers patient and persistent like something that knows you cannot escape it. And here is the slightly uncomfortable truth you probably will not enjoy. You probably would not survive this very well, not because it is impossible, but because everything you rely on today simply is not here. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing how far these quiet journeys travel. Now dim the lights. You step inside. The door closes behind you with a soft, heavy sound, and almost immediately the outside world fades. But the warmth you might expect does not rush in to greet you. Instead, the air feels still, cool, slightly damp as if the building itself has been holding on to the night. A widely accepted historical understanding tells us that Roman houses, especially those built from stone and concrete, were excellent at retaining cool temperatures in summer, but far less effective at keeping warmth during winter months. What you are feeling now is exactly that trade-off. You take a slow breath and you notice the smell, faint smoke, oil, maybe a hint of cooked grain lingering from earlier in the day. It is not unpleasant, just lived in. The light is soft, filtered through a small opening above. Shadows stretch gently across the floor, and beneath your feet the stone feels colder than you expected, not icy, but enough to remind you that this place is not designed for comfort in the way you understand it. You move further inside. There are voices somewhere deeper in the house, quiet, steady. Life continues here. Winter does not stop it. A lesser-known detail is that many Roman homes were not fully sealed from drafts. Tiny gaps in doors, open atriums, and ventilation features meant that cold air could drift through even well-built spaces. You might call it poor insulation. They would call it normal. You pass through a central space where a small pool reflects the dim light above. It is beautiful, calm, and absolutely not helping with the temperature. Water, after all, holds the cold. You pause for a moment, rubbing your hands together without thinking. The instinct feels modern, but the sensation is universal. How do they live like this? The answer is not in a single invention, not in a hidden heater waiting to surprise you. It is in a series of small adjustments. Habits, expectations, ways of living that accept the cold instead of trying to defeat it outright. Historians still argue whether Romans perceived winter discomfort as strongly as we do today, or if their expectations of indoor comfort were simply lower due to lifelong exposure. Standing here, you begin to suspect the answer is somewhere in between. You hear footsteps. Someone passes through the room wrapped in layered fabric, moving with purpose. They do not seem bothered by the cold, or perhaps they are simply used to it in a way that no longer shows on their face. You follow slowly. The deeper you go into the house, the more you begin to notice how space is used. Not all rooms are equal. Some feel slightly warmer. Others feel almost untouched by human presence, their air still and cool. You begin to understand something subtle. They do not try to heat the whole house. They choose where to live within it. You step into a smaller room now, lower ceiling, less open space, and immediately it feels different. Not warm exactly, but less cold. The difference is enough to matter. In one corner, a small metal container sits on a stand. Inside, faint embers glow. A brazier. Simple, portable, dangerous if mishandled, but here it is controlled. You move closer, holding your hands out carefully. The warmth is gentle, local. It does not fill the room. It does not chase away the chill entirely, but it gives you something to hold on to. And that is the key. Roman winter survival is not about transforming the environment. It is about creating pockets of comfort within it. A curious detail that does not always make it into mainstream discussions is that some Romans believed certain materials or objects could subtly influence warmth or cold, not in a scientific sense, but in a symbolic or experiential way. Whether through colour placement or association, the environment was shaped as much by perception as by physics. You glance around again. Textiles, curtains, cushions, small adjustments everywhere, each one doing a little. None of them doing everything. You sit. The stone bench beneath you is covered with fabric. Without it, the cold would seep straight through. With it, you can remain here. Not perfectly comfortable, but comfortable enough. And that phrase begins to settle in your mind. Comfortable enough. Outside, the winter continues, quiet, persistent, but inside, life adapts around it. You notice how people gather closer together, not crowded, just nearer than they might be in warmer months. Conversation is softer, movements are slower, energy is conserved without being consciously rationed. Even the light feels different, lower, warmer in tone, as if the entire space has shifted into a kind of seasonal rhythm. You lean slightly closer to the brazier. The warmth brushes your hands, your face. It is not strong, but it is real. And for now, it is enough. As you sit there listening to the faint sounds of the household, you begin to realize that surviving a Roman winter is not about winning against the cold. It is about learning how to live with it. And slowly, without quite noticing when it happens, your body begins to adjust. The chill is still there, but it feels less sharp, less intrusive. You settle in just a little deeper. There is a long way to go through the winter, but for now you have found your place within it. You remain where you are for a moment, letting your hands hover near the soft glow of the brazier, and gradually your attention drifts back to the house itself. Not the people this time, not the warmth, but the structure around you. Because the more you sit with it, the more you begin to notice something quietly important. This place was never meant to keep you warm. You stand again slowly and step away from the small circle of heat. Almost immediately the chill returns, slipping back across your skins, like it had simply been waiting for you to move. The contrast is gentle but undeniable. A well-established historical observation tells us that Roman domestic architecture prioritized airflow, light and cooling, especially in Mediterranean climates where heat was the greater concern for most of the year. What you are feeling now is the consequence of that priority. You walk back toward the central atrium. The open roof above allows a pale winter light to spill downward, illuminating the shallow pool below. It is beautiful in that calm, quiet way that Roman design often is. Balanced, intentional, and yet you can feel it. That faint downward drift of colder air. You tilt your head slightly, watching the space where the sky meets the house. There is no glass here, no barrier, just an opening. In summer it would be a blessing. Now it is simply another path for the cold to enter. You wrap your arms loosely across yourself, more out of instinct than necessity. A small, often overlooked detail is that even wealthy Roman homes did not use window glass in the way you might expect. While some forms of glass existed, many openings were covered with shutters, cloth, or left partially open, allowing light and air to move freely, but offering little protection from the chill. You move along the edge of the room, your footsteps soft against the stone. The walls rise around you thick and solid. You reach out, brushing your fingers lightly against the surface. It feels cool to the touch, not frozen, but steady, as if it has been holding the memory of colder nights long after the sun has risen. Stone does not forget quickly, and that you realize is part of the challenge. During the day, even when sunlight warms parts of the house, the walls absorb and store that temperature. But in winter, when the sun is weaker, the same walls seem to hold on to the cold instead, releasing it slowly back into the space. You glance toward a doorway leading to another room. Curiosity pulls you forward again. This room is larger, more open, and immediately it feels colder. The kind of cold that does not rush at you but settles around you evenly like a quiet presence. There are fewer textiles here, less fabric, less interruption between you and the stone surfaces. You pause in the center of the room and listen. The air feels still, almost too still. And for a brief moment you understand why people naturally drift towards smaller spaces in winter. Not because they are told to, but because the body seeks it out. Historians continue to debate whether Roman homeowners consciously adapted their daily routines to specific rooms during colder months, or if these patterns emerged naturally over time through habit and experience. Standing here, the answer feels obvious in a way that does not need words. Of course they did. You step back. Returning to the narrower passage, you notice how even a slight reduction in space makes a difference. The walls feel closer, the air feels less exposed. You begin to see the house differently now, not as a single environment, but as a collection of microclimates. Some spaces are to be passed through, some are to be avoided, and some are to be lived in. You turn your attention upward. Again, the ceilings vary. Some rooms are tall and open, allowing air to circulate. Others are lower, more contained. The lower spaces feel subtly more comfortable, holding what little warmth is available just a bit closer to you. It is not dramatic, but it is enough. A curious and slightly unusual tidbit is that in certain Roman designs, people would hang heavy curtains or drape fabrics not just for decoration or privacy, but to subtly influence airflow within a room, creating small pockets where warmth could linger longer than it otherwise would. You imagine those curtains now shifting slightly with the movement of air guiding it in ways that are almost invisible. You step into another small chamber. This one feels lived in. Cushions arranged carefully, a low table, fabric layered over seating areas. It is not luxurious in the modern sense, but it is thoughtful. You sit again, testing the surface beneath you. Softer, insulated. Even this small difference matters. You press your palm against the cushion, then lift it slightly, noticing the layers beneath. Wool perhaps, or something similar. Materials chosen not just for comfort, but for their ability to hold warmth. You exhale slowly. The house is not fighting the cold. It is negotiating with it. Every choice, every adjustment, every placement of fabric or use of space is part of that quiet negotiation. You lean back slightly, letting your shoulders relax. Somewhere nearby you hear the faint crackle of fire again. The brazier you left behind. Its presence now feels more significant than before. Not because it is powerful, but because it is intentional. In a house like this, intention matters more than strength. You look once more toward the atrium where the light continues to fall gently into the space. The beauty of it has not changed, but your understanding of it has. This is not a warm home. It is a livable one. And that distinction, subtle as it is, makes all the difference. You draw your hands together again, feeling the lingering warmth from earlier beginning to fade. So you stand, and this time you move with a bit more awareness, choosing where to step, where to linger, where to avoid. The house has not changed, but you have started to learn how to exist within it. And as you pass once more through the shifting light and shadows, you begin to sense that survival here is not about grand solutions. It's about attention, small decisions, and the quiet art of staying just warm enough. You drift back toward that faint, steady glow you noticed earlier, the one that seemed almost insignificant at first. Now, after moving through colder rooms and feeling the quiet persistence of stone and air, it draws you in more clearly. The brazier. It sits where you left it, low and unassuming, its metal sides darkened by use, its contents softly alive with heat. No roaring flames, no dramatic firelight, just a bed of coals breathing slowly as if the warmth itself has learned patience. You kneel beside it. The warmth reaches you again, brushing across your hands, your face, your chest, not overwhelming, not complete, but immediate, reliable. A commonly accepted historical fact tells us that portable braziers were one of the most widely used heating methods in Roman homes, especially in spaces without built-in systems like hypocausts. They were simple, accessible, and effective in small areas. You extend your fingers a little closer. There is a rhythm to this. Not too close, not too far. You instinctively adjust, finding that narrow space where the heat is strongest without becoming uncomfortable. It feels almost like learning a language, one that your body understands faster than your mind. Around you, the room continues as before. Quiet movement, low voices, but now you notice something new. Everyone positions themselves in relation to the heat, not in a tight circle, not in an obvious pattern, but subtly, naturally. Someone sits just within reach of the warmth. Another shifts slightly to share it. No one wastes the space it creates. It is a shared resource, and like all shared things, it is managed without needing to be spoken about. A lesser-known detail reveals that Romans often used charcoal rather than open wood fires in braziers because it burned more steadily and produced less visible flame, making it more suitable for indoor use. What you are seeing here is not just a fire, but a controlled source of heat shaped by experience. You glance down at the coals. They glow softly, shifting between deep red and dull orange. Occasionally a faint crackle breaks the silence, a tiny spark settling back into the bed of embers. It is calm, almost soothing. You hold your hands over it again. This time you notice the smell more clearly. Not sharp smoke, but a dry, earthy scent, charcoal. Clean in its own way, though not without risk. Because there is always risk. Historians still debate how aware Romans were of the dangers of indoor air quality, especially with the use of braziers in enclosed spaces. Some evidence suggests they understood the need for ventilation, while other accounts hint at accidental harm from fumes that could not be seen or smelled easily. You glance toward the doorway. It remained slightly open, not way. Just enough. A quiet exchange between warmth and air. You shift your position slightly, sitting cross-legged now, letting the heat reach your legs more fully. The difference is immediate, small, but enough to ease that lingering chill. Across the room, someone adjusts the brazier. They do it carefully, using a small tool to stir the coals, not aggressively. Just enough to wake them, to encourage a bit more heat. The glow deepens for a moment, the warmth intensifies, then settles again. It's not about making a fire stronger. It is about keeping it alive. You watch closely. This is not something left unattended, not something forgotten. The brazier requires awareness, timing, a kind of quiet maintenance that becomes part of daily life. A slightly unusual tidbit suggests that in some Roman households, braziers were even moved from room to room throughout the day, following the people rather than staying fixed in one place. Heat in this sense becomes mobile, personal, almost companion-like. You imagine that? Now, carrying warmth with you, not filling the house, but creating small islands of comfort wherever you choose to rest. You lean a little closer again. The warmth brushes your face, softening the tension you did not realize you were holding. Your shoulders drop slightly. Your breathing slows. There is something deeply human about this, gathering around a small source of heat, sharing it, protecting it. You hear a faint cough from somewhere near you, a reminder. Even this simple comfort is not without consequence. Too much smoke, too little airflow, a moment of carelessness. The balance is delicate. You glance again toward the doorway, then toward the small opening above in the atrium beyond. Air is always moving, even if you cannot feel it directly. And that movement is what keeps this space livable. You shift your hands again, turning them slowly so both sides catch the warmth. Your fingers begin to feel more responsive, less stiff. You had not even noticed how cold they were before. That is the thing about this kind of cold. It does not announce itself loudly. It settles in quietly until something like this reminds you what warmth feels like again. You sit there for a while, not speaking, not moving much, just existing within that small circle of heat. And you begin to understand something more clearly. This is not luxury. This is necessity shaped into something almost comforting. The brazier does not transform the room. It transforms your experience of it. You glance around once more. The stone walls are still there. The air is still cool beyond the immediate reach of the coals. The house has not changed, but within this small space you're no longer focused on the cold. You're focused on the warmth, and that shift, subtle as it is, changes everything. You lean back slightly, still close enough to feel the heat, but no longer reaching for it as urgently. Your body begins to settle into a new balance. Not perfectly warm, but no longer uncomfortable. And as the coals continue their slow, steady glow, you realize that surviving a Roman winter is not about eliminating the cold. It is about managing your relationship with it. One small fire at a time, you stay with that quiet warmth a little longer, letting it settle into your hands and face, and then slowly your attention shifts again. because someone nearby rises, brushing off their cloak, and moves toward a different part of the house. Not toward another brazier, not toward the kitchen, but towards something more hidden. You follow almost instinctively, through a narrow passage past walls that hold their familiar coolness until you reach a room that feels different. Not dramatically so at first, just a subtle change. The air here does not cling to you in the same way. It feels steadier, softer, as if the cold has been gently pushed back rather than simply endured. You step inside, and then you notice it. The floor. It's not warm in the way modern heating might feel, but there is a faint, unmistakable absence of chill. When your foot settles, it does not recoil, it rests. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that the Romans developed a system called the hippocaust, an early form of underfloor heating that circulated warm air beneath raised floors, and sometimes through hollow walls. What you are standing on now is part of that system. You glance down, almost expecting to see something moving beneath you, but there is nothing visible. Only stone carefully laid, supported by small pillars beneath, creating a hidden space where heat travels slowly, steadily out of sight. You take a few steps forward. Each one confirms it. This room is different. Not hot, not even truly warm by your standards, but compared to everything you have experienced so far, it feels almost luxurious. You exhale, and for the first time since entering the house, you do not feel the need to rub your hands together. At the far end of the room, an opening leads toward another space. You move closer, peering through. There faintly you see the source, a furnace room, a place where a fire burns more strongly tended, carefully feeding heat into the system beneath your feet. The air down there is warmer, thicker, with the scent of smoke and ash, but here in this room it arrives softened, distributed, controlled. A lesser-known detail is that hypercourse systems required constant maintenance and labour, often carried out by enslaved workers who kept the fires burning and the air channels clear. This quiet comfort you're experiencing depends on someone else's continuous effort. You pause. The warmth feels different now, knowing that. Not less welcome, but more complex. You step further into the room, noticing how the walls themselves feel slightly less cold than in other parts of the house. In some buildings, hollow tiles carried warm air upward, gently heating vertical surfaces as well. You reach out, brushing your fingers along the wall. Still cool, but not biting, just enough to soften the edge of winter. Historians still debate how widespread hippocaust systems were in private homes, as opposed to bathhouses and public buildings where they are more commonly documented. Standing here, it becomes clear that this is not the norm. This is privilege. You look around again. The space is more refined, more carefully arranged, fewer signs of compromise, less need for thick layers of fabric or clustered seating. Here the environment itself does some of the work. You lower yourself onto a bench. The surface beneath you holds a faint trace of warmth. Not enough to draw attention, but enough that you do not feel the urge to shift immediately. It is subtle. Everything about this system is subtle. No roaring fire, no flickering light, just a quiet, consistent presence that changes the entire experience of the room. You close your eyes for a moment, and you imagine what it would feel like after hours in colder spaces, to step into this room, to feel that gentle release from the constant awareness of chill. It would feel like relief, not dramatic, but deeply appreciated. A curious and somewhat unusual observation is that some Roman writers expressed concern about the indulgence of heated spaces, suggesting that too much comfort could weaken the body or the character. Warmth in this sense was not just a physical experience, but a moral one. You open your eyes again. That idea lingers. Even here in this carefully warmed room, there is an awareness that this is not how most people live. You stand again, moving slowly across the floor, paying attention to the sensation beneath your feet. It remains consistent, even quiet network of warmth beneath the surface. You glance once more toward the furnace space. The fire there is stronger, more demanding. It requires fuel, attention, labour. And if it stops even briefly, the system begins to cool. The warmth here is not permanent, it is maintained. You turn back towards the centre of the room. There is a calmness here that you did not feel elsewhere. Not just because of the temperature, but because of what it allows. People can sit longer, move less. think more clearly without the constant distraction of cold. It changes behavior. It changes rhythm. You take a slow breath. For a moment you understand why this kind of system would be so valued, why it would be associated with wealth, with status, with a certain kind of Roman sophistication. And yet, you also understand its limits. It does not reach the whole house. It does not follow you from room to room like the brazier. It is fixed, localized, dependent. You step back towards the doorway. As you cross the threshold, the difference returns immediately. The air cools. The stone beneath your feet loses that subtle softness. The contrast is gentle, but clear. You pause just outside the room, looking back once more. That quiet pocket of warmth remains behind you, contained within its walls. And you realize something important. Even the most advanced Roman heating is still just one part of a larger system of survival. It does not replace the layers, the braziers, the careful use of space. It joins them. You turn away, moving back into the cooler corridors of the house. The winter is still there, waiting. But now you know that hidden beneath some floors, behind some walls, there are small, steady efforts to push it back. Not completely, but just enough. You step back into the cooler corridor, leaving that quiet, hidden warmth behind, and almost immediately your body notices the difference. It is not dramatic, just a gentle reminder that comfort here is never guaranteed. It must be carried with you. And in this world you realize warmth is not only something you find in a place, it is something you wear. You pause near a wooden chest set against the wall. Someone has left it slightly open, as if they were in the middle of choosing what to put on before stepping out into the day. You lean closer, curiosity pulling you in. Inside there are layers, soft folds of fabric carefully arranged, wool thick and slightly coarse to the touch. Linen lighter, smoother but clearly not meant to stand alone against winter air. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that wool was the primary material used in Roman clothing during colder months, valued for its ability to retain heat even when slightly damp. It is not luxurious in the modern sense, but it is reliable. You lift a piece gently. It has weight to it. Not heavy enough to slow you down, but enough to remind you that this is not decorative, this is protection. You imagine yourself wearing it. First a tunic simple and close to the body. Then another layer, perhaps thicker, trapping warmth between the fabrics. And finally a cloak draped over your shoulders, wrapping around you like a portable wall against the cold. You set the fabric back carefully. Across the room, someone adjusts their cloak, pulling it tighter, fastening it at the shoulder. The movement is familiar, almost instinctive, no wasted motion, no hesitation. They have done this every winter. A lesser-known detail is that Romans sometimes wore multiple tunics layered together during colder seasons, rather than relying on a single thick garment. It created pockets of air between layers, improving insulation in a way that feels surprisingly practical even now. You step closer watching. The fabric shifts as they move, catching the light in soft folds. It does not cling. It does not restrict. It allows for movement for daily life to continue without constant discomfort. You glance down at your own arms, imagining the difference. Without these layers, the cold touches your skin directly. With them, it meets resistance, slowed, softened, not defeated, but managed. Historians still argue whether Roman clothing was sufficient for harsher winters in northern regions, or if people simply endured a greater degree of discomfort than we would tolerate today. Standing here, you begin to suspect that endurance played a larger role than comfort. You move toward another section of the room where smaller items are stored. Socks. Not the soft elastic kind you might expect, but simple coverings often made of wool or felt designed to wrap around the feet. You pick one up, turning it over in your hands. It's thicker than it looks. Practical. You glance down at the stone floor beneath you. Even now you can feel its quiet chill rising upward. Covering your feet is not optional here. It is essential. You set the sock back and notice a pair of shoes nearby. Leather sturdy, slightly worn. Not perfectly sealed against the elements, but enough to provide a barrier between you and the ground. A curious and slightly unexpected tidbit is that some Romans added extra padding or stuffing inside their footwear during winter months, using scraps of fabric or wool to create additional insulation. It is a small adjustment, but in this environment, small adjustments matter. You step back, again taking in the scene, layer upon layer. each piece doing a little, none of them doing everything, you begin to understand that clothing here is not about style alone. It is about strategy. You pull your arms closer to your body, mimicking what you have seen. Immediately it helps. Less heat is escaping. The body becomes part of the system. You watch as someone else enters the room, shaking off a bit of the outside air as they close the door behind them. Their cheeks are slightly flushed from the cold, their breath just visible for a moment before it fades. They move without hesitation toward the chest, adding another layer, adjusting to what they already wear. It is routine, not a reaction. Preparation happens before the cold becomes unbearable. You lean lightly against the wall, feeling its steady coolness through the fabric you imagine wearing. Even with layers, the environment is always present, always part of the experience. You glance again toward the corridor leading back to the atrium. The house has not become warmer, but you are beginning to see how people make themselves warmer within it. A shift in perspective, not changing the space, changing how you move through it. You imagine stepping outside, now wrapped in those layers. The cold air would still be there brushing against your face, your hands, but your core would remain protected, your movement less restricted by discomfort. It's not perfect, but it is enough. You take a slow breath. There is a quiet satisfaction in this kind of preparation, in knowing that you have done what you can before facing the day. You look once more at the folded fabrics, the carefully chosen materials, the small adjustments that make a difference over hours and days. This is not luxury. It is resilience woven into cloth. And as you turn to move back through the house, you carry that understanding with you. Warmth is not only something you find in fire or stone, it is something you build around yourself, layer by layer. You leave the folded layers behind, stepping quietly into another part of the house, where the light grows softer and the sounds of movement begin to fade. The air here feels still, almost hushed, as if this space belongs to a different rhythm altogether. Night, or at least the preparation for it. You slow your pace without thinking your footsteps lighter now, as though the space itself is asking you to be gentle. Ahead you notice a low bed carefully arranged, its shape simple but intentional. You move closer. At first glance it does not look especially inviting. A wooden frame, a mattress that appears thinner than what you might expect, but as you lean in you begin to see the details. Layers again. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that Roman beds were often filled with materials such as straw wool feathers or even dried leaves depending on wealth and availability. What seems plain from a distance becomes more complex up close. You press your hand lightly into the surface. It gives just slightly. Okay. Not soft in a modern sense, but not rigid either. Enough to support the body without pressing it directly against the cold structure beneath. You sit on the edge. The sensation is immediate. The bed does not feel warm, but it does not pull heat away from you as quickly as the stone floors do. It holds a neutral ground, a small victory. You glance toward the blankets folded neatly at the foot. Thick, layered, wool again most likely. You reach out and lift one, feeling its weight settle into your hands. It is heavier than you expect, designed to press down gently, trapping warmth closest to the body. A lesser-known detail is that some Romans used multiple blankets or coverings at once, layering them in a way that created pockets of retained heat, especially during colder nights, when indoor temperatures drop significantly. You unfold the blanket slightly, letting it drape across your lap. Even this small contact makes a difference. You can imagine it now. Lying beneath these layers, your body heat slowly building, held in place by the fabric above you. Not instant warmth, but gradual, earned. You look up. Around the bed there are curtains. Not thick walls or solid barriers, but hanging fabric that encloses the sleeping space just enough to separate it from the rest of the room. You reach out, brushing the edge of one. Soft, flexible, and quietly important. Historians still debate how common bed curtains were in ordinary Roman households versus wealthier ones, but their function is clear. They reduce airflow. They create a smaller pocket of air that is easier to warm with your own body. You pull one slightly closer, imagining the full enclosure. The space becomes smaller, more contained. Safer. You lie back slowly. The mattress shifts beneath you, adjusting to your weight. The air above feels still protected by the curtains you imagine drawn around you. The blanket rests over you now, heavy but not uncomfortable. You exhale, and for the first time the cold feels distant. Not gone, but held at the edges. A curious and slightly unexpected observation is that Romans often shared sleeping spaces not always out of necessity, but because shared body heat made a noticeable difference during colder nights. Warmth once again becomes something collective. You imagine that now. Another presence beside you, not crowded, just close enough that the warmth between you grows stronger, steadier. It changes the experience entirely. You shift slightly under the blanket, tucking it closer around your shoulders. The movement is instinctive, something you have done countless times in your own life. But here it feels more essential. Every adjustment matters. You listen. The house has quieted. The distant sounds of movement have faded into soft occasional murmurs. Somewhere a brazier still glows. Somewhere a door shifts slightly in its frame. But here within this small enclosed space there is a calm. You can feel your body beginning to relax. Your muscles releasing the tension they carried from the cold earlier. You draw your hands closer, tucking them beneath the blanket. They warm slowly, gradually. There is no sudden comfort, only a steady transfer. You close your eyes for a moment, and you begin to understand something deeper. Surviving a Roman winter is not just about staying warm during the day. It is about recovering warmth at night. About giving the body a chance to rebuild what the cold has taken. You open your eyes again, glancing at the faint outline of the curtains around you. This small space, this simple arrangement of fabric and filling and shared presence becomes one of the most important parts of winter life. It is where endurance turns into rest, where the constant awareness of cold softens into something quieter. You shift slightly, settling deeper into the mattress. The weight of the blanket feels reassuring now, protective. And as you lie there listening to the stillness of the house, you realize that warmth in this moment is not something you chase. It is something you create, slowly, carefully, and just enough to carry you through the night. You remain there for a few quiet moments wrapped in that small pocket of stillness before the faint scent of something draws your attention. It is subtle at first, warm, familiar, a hint of grain perhaps, or oil gently heating. Food, and with it something else. Warmth that is not borrowed from coals alone, but created through activity, through presence, through life, continuing even in the cold. You sit up slowly, letting the blanket fall back into place and step away from the bed. The air greets you again, cooler than your sheltered space, but now your body feels steadier, less reactive. You follow the scent. It leads you through a narrow corridor, past the quiet rooms toward a part of the house that feels more alive. The sounds return first. Low voices, the soft clink of pottery, the faint crackle of a fire that is larger than the brazier. You step inside, the kitchen. It is not grand, not carefully decorated, but it is active, and immediately you feel it. The warmth, a widely accepted historical fact, tells us that Roman kitchens were often centered around a hearth or cooking fire, which served as one of the most consistent sources of heat within a household during colder months. What you feel now is the result of that constant use. You move closer. The fire here is different from the brazier. It is more open, more alive. Flames rise and fall, licking the bottom of a pot suspended above them. The light shifts with every movement, casting soft shadows along the walls. You hold your hands out again. The warmth is stronger here. Not overwhelming, but more present. More immediate. It reaches beyond your hands, touching your arms, your chest, your face. It fills the space in a way the brazier never quite could. You take a slow breath. The air carries the scent of cooking grain, perhaps porridge or stew mixed with the faint smoke of the fire. It is grounding, comforting in a way that feels deeper than simple heat. A lesser-known detail is that in many Roman homes, the kitchen was one of the few spaces that remained active throughout the day, meaning the fire was rarely allowed to go completely out. This continuous use made it one of the warmest and most dependable areas during winter. You glance around. People gather here, but not in a crowded way. Just enough to share the space. Someone stirs the pot slowly. Another sits there, hands adjusted toward the fire, their posture relaxed. You notice how they linger. not because they're idle, but because this is where it makes sense to be. Historians still debate whether Roman kitchens functioned as primary social spaces in colder seasons or if their role remained strictly practical. Standing here, it feels impossible to separate the two. You step closer to the hearth, careful not to come too near. The heat intensifies, pressing gently against your skin. It is the kind of warmth that feels almost alive, shifting constantly, never settling into a single temperature. You watch the flames. They move with a quiet rhythm, rising, falling, adjusting to the fuel beneath them. There is no rush here, no urgency, just a steady continuation. A curious and slightly unexpected observation is that some Roman households treated the hearth as more than a cooking space, associating it with the presence of household spirits or protective forces. The fire, in that sense, becomes both practical and symbolic. You glance at the surrounding space again. Simple tools, clay pots, wooden utensils, everything within reach. Everything used regularly. Nothing wasted. You sit near the edge of the hearth, choosing a spot where the warmth reaches you without overwhelming you. The stone beneath you has been gently heated over time, holding just enough warmth to soften its usual chill. You place your hands on your knees, letting the heat settle into your body. This feels different from the brazier. Less controllable, more generous. You notice how conversation flows here. Soft, steady, unforced. The kind of rhythm that comes from shared presence rather than deliberate interaction. No one is performing warmth. They are simply existing within it. You glance toward the pot again. Steam rises slowly, carrying with it the scent of whatever is cooking. It adds to the atmosphere, softening the air, making the space feel more complete. You imagine spending hours here, not just to eat, but to stay, to remain within reach of the fire, letting its presence carry you through the colder parts of the day. You shift slightly, feeling the warmth settle deeper into your muscles. Your shoulders relax again. The tension you carried from the colder rooms begins to fade. This is not just a kitchen, it is a refuge. You look around once more. The walls are still stone, the structure still holds the same limitations. But here those limitations feel less important, because the fire is constant, and where the fire is, life gathers. You lean forward slightly, extending your hands once more. The flames respond, flickering gently as if acknowledging your presence. And for a moment you understand something simple but essential. In a Roman winter, the kitchen is not just where food is prepared. It is where warmth is sustained, where people return, again and again. You remain near the hearth, letting its steady warmth settle into you. And after a while, your attention begins to drift toward the food itself. Not just the smell, but the quiet importance of it. Because here warmth is not only something you feel on your skin, it is something you take in. You watch as the pot is lifted, slightly stirred with a slow, practiced motion. The contents move thickly, releasing a deeper scent now. Grain softened by heat. Perhaps barley or wheat cooked down into something simple but filling. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that Roman winter diets often relied heavily on grains such as barley, wheat, and spelt prepared as porridge or bread, providing a steady source of energy that helped sustain the body through colder conditions. You lean forward slightly, drawn by the rising steam. It curls gently into the air, carrying warmth with it. Not enough to heat the room, but enough to soften the space around the fire to make everything feel just a little more comfortable. You notice how people eat here. Not hurried, not distracted. Each movement feels deliberate. A bowl is filled. Hands wrapped around it, not just to hold the food, but to absorb its heat. You can almost feel it from where you sit. You imagine the sensation, warmth moving from the bowl into your palms, from your palms into your body. Then slowly as you eat, spreading inward, creating a different kind of comfort. A lesser-known detail is that Romans often added olive oil to their meals, not only for flavour, but also for its caloric value, which provided sustained energy, especially important during colder seasons when the body required more fuel. You watch as someone drizzles a small amount into their portion, the oil catching the light briefly before disappearing into the surface of the food. Simple, effective. You shift slightly closer, feeling the warmth of the hearth and the imagined warmth of the food combine in your awareness. This is not indulgence. It is survival made steady and quiet. Historians still argue whether Roman diets in winter tour were nutritionally sufficient by modern standards, or if many people lived in a constant state of mild deficiency that they simply adapted to over time. You consider that for a moment. The food here is not varied in the way you might expect, no abundance of fresh vegetables, no constant supply of different flavours. But it is consistent, and consistency matters. You watch as a piece of bread is passed from one person to another. It is dense, slightly rough in texture, but it holds its shape. You imagine tearing into it, the warmth from the hearth softening it just enough to make it easier to eat. Bread and heat. Together they create something more than either could alone. A curious and slightly unusual tidbit is that warm wine was sometimes consumed during colder periods, occasionally mixed with spices or herbs, offering not only comfort but also the perception of increased warmth throughout the body. You glance toward a cup resting nearby. The surface is still, but you can imagine the gentle heat it might hold. Not enough to change the room, but enough to change how you feel within it. You reach your hands closer to the fire again, then draw them back, imagining holding that cup instead. The difference is subtle, but important. You sit there for a while, observing the rhythm. Food is prepared, shared, consumed slowly. No urgency, no excess. Just enough. You begin to understand that eating here is not just about satisfying hunger. It is about maintaining balance. The body loses warmth throughout the day, slowly, steadily. And here, in this space, that loss is quietly restored. You shift your posture slightly, letting your back rest more comfortably against the wall. The warmth from the hearth reaches you. The imagined warmth of food settles deeper in your mind. Together they create a sense of stability. You glance around once more. No one speaks loudly. No one rushes. Everything moves at a pace that matches the season. Slower, more deliberate. You notice how people remain near the hearth even after they have finished eating. Hands still extended, bodies still angled toward the fire. Because the warmth does not end with the meal, it lingers. You exhale slowly. Your body feels different now. Not completely warm, but no longer fighting the cold in the same way. There is a quiet strength building, one that comes not from escaping the environment, but from working with it. You lean forward slightly again, watching the last of the steam rise from the pot. The scent is softer, now fading as the food is shared and consumed, but the effect remains. And as you sit there, surrounded by the low sounds of the kitchen, the steady presence of the fire and the quiet rhythm of people sustaining themselves, you begin to see something clearly. Warmth in a Roman winter is not a single solution. It is a collection of small, repeated acts. Clothing, fire, shelter, and food, each one adding a little, each one necessary. You rest your hands on your knees, again letting the warmth settle where it can. And for now it is enough. You linger by the hearth a little longer until the warmth begins to feel familiar rather than remarkable, and then slowly your attention shifts outward again. Because someone nearby stands gathering their cloak and prepares to leave. Into the cold, but not for long. You follow at a distance, curious now, stepping back through the corridor, past the rooms you're beginning to recognize, and out toward the street. The air greets you again, cool and steady, brushing across your face, slipping through the edges of your clothing. It feels sharper after the warmth. Sire. You draw your cloak closer, just as you have seen others do. The streets are not empty. Life continues even now. People move with purpose, their steps measured, their movements efficient. No one lingers without reason. And then you see it. The baths. Large, solid, rising from the city with a quiet confidence. Steam drifts faintly into the air, barely visible but enough to catch your attention. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that Roman bathhouses were heated using hypercore systems similar to those found in wealthy homes, but on a much larger scale, allowing entire complexes to maintain warm rooms even during colder seasons. You move closer. The entrance is open, and as you step inside, the change is immediate. Warmth, not the small, localized warmth of a brazier, not the shifting heat of a kitchen fire, but a more complete presence filling the space surrounding you. You exhale without realizing you are holding your breath. The air here is different, moist, soft. It carries the scent of waterstone and something faintly mineral. It wraps around you, easing the tension you did not notice building again after stepping outside. You move further in. Voices echo, gently softened by the humidity. Footsteps are quieter here, absorbed by the damp surfaces. The light reflects off pools of water, creating a calm, shifting glow. A lesser-known detail is that many Romans visited bathhouses regularly, not just for hygiene, but for social interaction and relaxation, making them one of the most important public spaces in daily life, especially during colder months. You pause near the edge of a warm room. People sit, recline, and move slowly through the space. No rush, no urgency. The environment itself encourages stillness. You step forward. The warmth increases gradually, not all at once. It builds as you move deeper, guided by the design of the baths themselves. Historians still debate how accessible public baths were to all levels of Roman society, but it is clear that even modest access provided a rare opportunity for ordinary people to experience sustained warmth that they could not maintain at home. You notice how people transition from one area to another. Cooler rooms, warmer rooms, hot rooms, each step intentional, each space offering a different level of heat. You enter a warmer chamber. The air thickens slightly, wrapping around your skin. You can feel it settling into your muscles, easing them, loosening what the cold had tightened. You close your eyes briefly. The sensation is immediate. Relief. A curious and slightly unexpected observation is that the sequence of moving through different temperature rooms was not only practical but also considered beneficial for the body, though the exact health effects were understood more through tradition than science. You open your eyes again. A pool stretches out before you, its surface calm, faint ripples moving across it as someone steps in. Steam rises gently, blurring the edges of the room. You kneel beside it, dipping your fingers into the water. Warm, not hot enough to shock you, just enough to invite you in. You imagine stepping into it fully, the warmth surrounding you, completely reaching every part of your body at once, a level of comfort that the rest of the Roman winter rarely allows. You sit back slightly watching. People speak quietly, some sit in silence. Others move between spaces following a rhythm that feels both structured and relaxed. This is not just about cleaning the body, it is about resetting it. You lean against the wall, feeling its gentle warmth through your clothing. Even the stone here feels different, as if it has absorbed and softened over time. You breathe slowly. The contrast with the outside world becomes more apparent the longer you remain here. Cold streets, cool houses, and then this. A place where warmth is not so scarce. Where it is shared, maintained, expected, you begin to understand why this would matter so much. In a world where most warmth is temporary, localized, fragile, the baths offer something rare. Consistency. You glance around once more. Faces are calmer here, movement slower, voices softer. The cold has no urgency in this space. You shift your position slightly, letting your body relax into the warmth. And for a moment you allow yourself to forget the chill waiting outside. Because here, in this carefully constructed environment of heat and water and stone, the Roman winter feels distant. Not gone, but held at bay. Just long enough to remind you what warmth can feel like when it is not something you have to chase. You stay in that warmth a little longer than you expected, letting it settle into your muscles, into your breathing, into the quiet space behind your thoughts. But eventually, as always, you have to leave. You step back through the sequence of rooms, warm to cool, soft air to sharper air, and then once again the street. The cold greets you differently this time, not as a shock but as a reminder. It is still here, still steady, still patient. You draw your cloak tighter and begin to walk, because winter does not pause the world. It only changes how the world moves. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that Roman daily life, including labour and trade, continued throughout the winter months. Despite shorter daylight hours and colder conditions, work does not stop. It adapts. You move along the street, noticing the rhythm. Shops are open. Not all of them. Some doors remain closed. Their activity reduced, but many. They continue. A vendor adjusts his stall, his hands moving quickly, efficiently, as if speed itself is a form of warmth. You pause nearby. He does not linger. He does not stand still. His movements are constant, arranging, lifting, shifting. The body in motion generates its own heat, small but meaningful. You begin to understand. Stillness invites the cold. Movement pushes against it. A lesser-known detail is that many forms of Roman labour, particularly in urban settings, required constant physical activity which unintentionally helped workers maintain body warmth even in cooler conditions. You step aside as a group passes. Their breath is faintly visible for a moment before it disappears. Their pace is steady, not hurried, but purposeful. No one wastes energy, but no one stops completely either. You continue walking. The streets feel narrower now, the buildings rising on either side, creating channels where the air moves differently. In some places the wind is blocked, making the cold feel softer. In others it slips through, sharply catching you off guard. You adjust your path without thinking, choosing routes that feel more sheltered. Historians still debate how urban design influenced winter comfort in Roman cities, but it is clear that people learned to navigate their environment in ways that minimized exposure whenever possible. You pass a workshop. Inside, a craftsman works at a bench, his hand steady despite the chill. A small fire burns nearby, not large enough to heat the entire space, but enough to take the edge off. You step closer to the doorway. The air inside feels slightly warmer than the street, not because of any grand system, but because of enclosure activity and that single source of heat. You watch for a moment. His movements are precise, repetitive, focused. Work becomes rhythm, and rhythm becomes a way to endure. A curious and slightly unexpected observation is that some Roman workers preferred to keep moving continuously during colder periods rather than taking frequent breaks, as stopping often made the cold feel more intense when they resumed. You continue on. Further along, you reach a more open space. The light here is brighter, though still soft, filtered through the winter sky. People gather briefly, exchanging good words, small moments of connection. But even here, no one lingers long. The cold encourages efficiency. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, noticing how even that small movement helps. You flex your fingers slightly, keeping them from stiffening. Your body begins to mirror what you see around you. Constant subtle motion. You pass another stall where food is being prepared. Steam rises again, drawing people closer, not just for the meal, but for the warmth it offers in passing. You pause for a moment within that drifting warmth, then move on. It is enough. Just enough. You glance down at the ground beneath your feet. Stone again. Always stone now. It holds the cold, releases it, slowly shaping every step you take. You begin to understand that winter here is not an event. It is a condition. Persistent. Unavoidable. And so life adjusts around it. You turn into a narrower street, the buildings closer now, the air calmer. Your shoulders relax slightly as the wind lessens. Even this small change matters. You notice a group working together, lifting something heavy, their movements coordinated. There is warmth in that effort, in that shared motion. You watch for a moment. They do not speak much. They do not need to. The work itself carries them. You move on again, your steps steady, your breath even. And gradually you realize something that feels both simple and profound. Surviving a Roman winter is not about finding a single place of comfort and staying there. It is about moving through many spaces, each offering a little. A brazier, a kitchen, a bath, a moment of sunlight, a stretch of sheltered street. Each one adds something. Each one helps you continue. You pull your cloak closer once more, feeling its weight settle around you. The cold is still there, but now you're moving with it, not against it. And as you continue through the steady rhythm of the city, you begin to see that endurance here is not dramatic. It is quiet, constant, and built into every step. You keep moving through the city, your steps settling into that steady rhythm you've begun to understand, until gradually the streets begin to thin. The buildings grow less crowded. The air feels a little more open, a little less protected. And then, without quite noticing when it happens, you are no longer in the centre of Rome. You are somewhere colder. The sky feels wider here. The wind less forgiving. It moves across the land with fewer obstacles, carrying a sharper edge that slips easily through cloth and into your awareness. You pull your cloak tighter again. This is not the gentle chill of the city. This is something more persistent. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that Roman soldiers stationed in northern provinces such as Britannia and Germania faced significantly harsher winters than those in Italy, often encountering freezing temperatures, snow, and prolonged cold conditions unfamiliar to many from the Mediterranean. You look ahead, a fort rises in the distance, solid, practical, built for defense, not comfort. Its walls stand firm against the landscape, but you can already sense that whatever warmth exists inside will be hard-earned. You approach. The ground beneath your feet feels different here. Not just cold, but heavier somehow, as if the season has settled deeper into the land itself. Inside the fort, movement continues. Soldiers walk with purpose, their cloaks thicker, their posture slightly more guarded against the cold above you. You notice how they keep moving even when there is no immediate task. Small adjustments, shifting weight, flicking fingers. The body again becomes a tool. A lesser-known detail is that Roman soldiers in colder regions often adapted their clothing by adding extra layers, including heavier cloaks and sometimes locally influenced garments better suited to the climate they were stationed in. You watch as one adjusts his cloak, pulling it closer around his neck, tucking it carefully to block the wind. The movement is quick practice, done without thought. You step further into the fort. The structures here are simpler, more enclosed, built to withstand not just attack, but the environment itself. The openings are smaller, the walls thicker. Even so, the cold finds its way in. Historians still debate how effectively Roman military architecture provided insulation against extreme weather, with some evidence suggesting that while forts offered shelter, they were far from comfortable during deep winter. You enter a barracks. The air inside is slightly less sharp, but not warm, just contained. You notice braziers here as well, their coals glowing faintly, providing small pockets of heat for groups gathered nearby. You move closer to one. The warmth feels familiar now, not surprising, just part of the system you've come to expect. Around you soldiers sit their movements slower, conserving energy. Some rub their hands together. Others hold them near the coals, turning them slowly to catch the heat. No one complains, or if they do, it is quiet, brief, and quickly set aside. A curious and slightly unexpected observation is that Roman soldiers were trained to endure discomfort as part of their discipline, including exposure to cold conditions, which was believed to strengthen both body and character. You watch their routine. Equipment is checked, adjusted, maintained. Even in the cold, the work continues. Not because it is easy, but because it must. You glance toward the doorway. Outside, the wind moves across the open space, carrying with it a faint sound that feels colder than anything you heard in the city. You step back slightly, returning your focus to the interior. Here, survival feels more deliberate, less about beauty, comfortable, more about readiness. You notice how the soldiers sit closer together than you saw in the city. Not crowded, but near enough that their presence adds to the shared warmth, even if only slightly. You shift your position, feeling the heat from the brazier reach you again. It's not enough to make you forget the cold, but it is enough to keep you going. You look around once more. Everything here is practical, nothing unnecessary. The cold strips away excess, leaving only what is essential. You take a slow breath. The air feels drier here, sharper. Each inhale a reminder of where you are. You imagine the nights, longer, colder, the kind where sleep comes slowly, and warmth must be built carefully, layer by layer, just as you have seen before. You glance again at the soldiers. Their faces are calm, focused, not because the cold does not affect them, but because they have learned how to exist within it, and that you realize is the difference here. In the city, winter is something to manage. Here it is something to endure. You draw your cloak tighter once more, feeling its weight settle around you. The wind outside continues, unchanged, but inside small efforts a brazier, a shared space, a steady routine, each one holding the coal back just enough. And as you stand there watching the quiet resilience of those who live at the edge of the Roman world, you begin to understand that survival in winter is not always about comfort. Sometimes it is simply about continuing. You remain in the barracks for a moment longer, watching the steady rhythm of soldiers who have learned to endure, and then slowly your thoughts drift back to the quieter spaces of the household. Because not everyone moves like this. Not everyone can rely on motion strength or discipline to keep the cold at bay. You step away from the fort in your mind, returning once more to the softer light of a Roman home where the sounds are gentler and the pace is slower. Here winter feels different, more intimate, more personal. You move into a smaller room, one you might have passed earlier without much thought. Now you notice who occupies it. A child sits near the edge of a low bed, wrapped carefully in layers, their movements slower, less certain. Nearby, an older figure rests, their posture slightly curved, their hands drawn close to their body as if holding on to what little warmth they can. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that the very young and the elderly were among the most vulnerable groups during colder seasons in ancient societies, as their bodies just struggled more to regulate temperature and maintain warmth. You step closer quietly. The room is arranged with care, more fabric than you saw in other spaces. Extra blankets, cushions placed not just for comfort but for insulation. The air feels slightly more contained, as though every effort has been made to reduce its movement. You notice how close they are to the brazier, closer than others might sit. The warmth is directed toward them intentionally. A lesser-known detail is that Roman families often prioritize limited heat sources for those most at risk, ensuring that children and elders receive the greatest benefit from braziers or warmer areas of the house. You watch as someone adjusts the coals gently, increasing the warmth just enough to make a difference. The movement is careful, measured, nothing is wasted. You glance at the child again. Their hands are wrapped in fabric fingers tucked inside. Their breathing is slow, visible for just a moment before it disappears into the still air. You feel a quiet shift in the atmosphere. This is not just about enduring the cold, it is about protecting against it. Historians still debate how effective family-level care was in preventing cold-related illness in ancient Rome, especially among vulnerable individuals. But it is clear that attention and proximity played an important role. You kneel slightly, bringing yourself closer to the level of the bed. The blanket draped over it is thicker than the ones you saw earlier, layered, carefully arranged to hold warmth as efficiently as possible. You reach out, brushing the edge of the fabric. It is worn but maintained, used often. A curious and slightly unexpected observation is that Roman caregivers sometimes relied on shared body warmth as a deliberate method of protection, keeping children or elders close during colder nights to conserve heat more effectively. You imagine that now. The quiet presence of another person nearby, the steady exchange of warmth that requires no tools, no fuel, just closeness. You shift your position slightly, feeling the air change as you move closer to the brazier. Here even a small distance matters. A step too far and the warmth fades. A step closer. Closer, and it returns. You begin to see how carefully this space is managed. Not through large changes, but through constant attention. You glance toward the doorway. It's kept mostly closed, allowing only a small gap for air to move. Enough to prevent the space from becoming stagnant, but not enough to let the cold flow freely inside. Balance again. Always balance. You listen. The room is quiet. Not empty, but calm. The kind of calm that comes from focus, from care, from a shared understanding that this space must remain stable. You look back at the older figure. Their hands rest near the brazier, palms turned slightly toward the heat. The movement is minimal, conserving energy, allowing the warmth to do its work slowly. You feel the difference in this room compared to others. Here time moves differently, more slowly, more deliberately. Every action has weight. Every adjustment matters. You take a slow breath. The air feels softer here, not because it is warmer, but because it is managed with intention. You realize something quietly important. For those who are strongest, winter is something to work through. For those who are most vulnerable, it is something to be carefully guided through. You stand slowly, stepping back just enough to take in the entire space once more. The brazier glows. The blankets hold their shapes. The room remains steady, and within it life continues, not easily, but gently. You turn toward the doorway, moving softly so as not to disturb the balance that has been created here. And as you step back into the cooler corridor, you carry with you a deeper understanding. Warmth in this world is not only about survival, it is also about care. Given, shared, protected, one quiet moment at a time. You step back into the corridor, carrying that quiet sense of care with you, and gradually the house begins to change again. The space opens, the sounds shift, and before long you find yourself leaving the calm of a single household behind. The city rises around you once more. But this time you're not returning to the elegant home with its controlled spaces and thoughtful arrangements. You're moving upward into the crowded layers of the city itself. You look up. The buildings stack above you several levels high. Their surfaces worn, their windows small, their structure practical rather than refined. These are the insulae, urban apartment blocks, and as you step inside, the difference is immediate. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that the majority of Rome's population lived in insulae multi-story buildings that housed many families in relatively small and often poorly insulated spaces. You begin to climb. The stairs are narrow, the air close. With each level, the space feels more confined, more removed from the warmth of ground-level life. By the time you reach the upper floors, the cold feels different, sharper, more exposed. You step into a room. It is small, bare, compared to the house you left earlier. Fewer fabrics, fewer adjustments, less control. You can feel the air moving here, slipping through cracks, settling into corners. A lesser-known detail is that higher floors in Roman insulae were often colder in winter and hotter in summer, as they were more exposed to external conditions and further from any ground-level heat sources. You wrap your arms closer to your body again. Here there's no hippocaust beneath your feet, no carefully managed kitchen hearth shared among a few. Instead, you see a small brazier similar to the one before but more heavily relied upon. It sits at the center of the room, its coals dimmer, its fuel clearly limited. You move closer. The warmth is weaker, still present, but stretched thin. You glance around. More people share this space. Not crowded to the point of discomfort, but close enough that personal space is smaller, more fluid. And yet you notice something. They sit closer to the brazier, closer to each other. Historians still debate how effectively residents of insulae could maintain warmth during winter, especially given the risks associated with indoor fires and limited access to fuel. You watch as someone carefully adds a small piece of charcoal to the brazier. Not much, just enough. Every piece of fuel matters here. A curious and slightly unexpected observation is that in some poorer households, people would conserve heat by limiting the size of the fire and relying more on shared body warmth and layered clothing to make up the difference. You sit down near the edge of the group. The warmth reaches you faint but noticeable. You feel how different it is from the kitchen hearth, from the bath, even from the brazier in the quieter house. Here the warmth is not guaranteed. It must be stretched, managed carefully. You glance toward the walls. They are thinner, less substantial. The cold from outside seems closer, as if it presses just beyond the surface, waiting for an opportunity to slip in. You hear a faint sound. Wind. It moves along the outside of the building, finding small openings, creating a soft, persistent whisper that never fully fades. You pull your imagined cloak tighter again. Even with layers, the environment here is harder to negotiate. You look around once more. There are fewer objects, fewer comforts. Everything here is functional, necessary. You notice how people move less, not out of relaxation, but out of conservation. Energy is limited. Heat is limited. Everything is measured. You shift your position slightly, moving closer to the brazier. Immediately the warmth improves, not dramatically, but enough to matter. You begin to understand the subtle competition that might exist in a space like this. Not spoken, not acknowledged directly, but present. Who sits closest? Who adjusts the fire? Who has access to more layers? You glance at the door. It opens briefly, letting in a sharper gust of cold air before closing again. The room reacts instantly. People pull their coverings tighter. The brazier seems smaller. The warmth retreats. Then slowly the balance returns. You exhale. This is a different kind of survival. Less about comfort. More about persistence. You look at the faces around you. Calm, focused, used to this, and you realize something that feels both simple and heavy. Winter is not experienced the same way by everyone. For some it is an inconvenience. For others it is a constant pressure, a condition that shapes every moment of the day. You rest your hands near the brazier, again feeling its limited heat reach you. It is enough, just enough, and in this space that is all it needs to be. You sit there for a while, listening to the quiet sounds of the building, the distant movement of others on lower floors, the soft whisper of wind outside. Life continues here, not easily, but steadily, and as you remain within that small circle of shared warmth, you begin to see that survival in a Roman winter depends not only on knowledge or tools, but on what you have access to, and what you can share. You remain seated for a while longer in that narrow upper room, feeling the limits of its warmth, until gradually your attention begins to drift outward again, because not all Roman life is stacked into crowded buildings like this. There is another world beyond the city. You make your way back down the stairs, each level bringing a slight change in air, a small shift in pressure, until at last you step outside. The cold greets you again, steady as ever, but now you begin to move away from the dense streets, away from the tight spaces, and toward the open land. The countryside stretches ahead. The air feels clearer here, colder perhaps, but less trapped. The sky wider, the light softer, reflecting off fields that lie quiet in the winter season. You walk along a worn path. In the distance you see it, a villa. Large balance set carefully into the landscape. It carries a quiet confidence not just in its size, but in its design. This is not a space built only for shelter. It is built for control. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that Roman villas often served as both homes and agricultural centres, with wealthier landowners able to invest in more advanced features including better insulation, larger hearths, and sometimes even hypercore systems. You approach. The structure feels familiar in some ways, echoing the house you saw earlier, but on a larger scale. More rooms, more variation in space, more opportunity to manage the environment. You step inside. The difference is immediate, though not absolute. There is still cold here, but it feels managed. A lesser-known detail is that rural villas often had better access to fuel sources such as wood from nearby land, allowing for more consistent heating compared to urban residents who depended on purchased fuel. You move through the rooms. Some are warm, clearly in use. Their fires active, their spaces arranged for comfort. Others are quiet, closed off, left to the cold because there is no need to heat them. You begin to recognize the pattern again. Selective living. You step into a central room where a larger hearth burns steadily. The flames are stronger than those you saw in the insula, fed more generously, maintained with less hesitation. You hold your hands out. The warmth reaches you more fully here, not luxurious, but reliable. Historians still debate how evenly warmth was distributed within rural villas, as even wealthy households had to balance fuel use with practicality, especially during prolonged cold periods. You glance toward the walls. There are more textiles here, rugs, drapes, layers added, not just for decoration but for insulation. The space feels more contained, more deliberate. You sit near the hearth. The stone beneath you holds a faint warmth built up over time. The air feels calmer, less prone to sudden shifts. You breathe slowly. This is a different kind of winter. Not easier, but more controlled. A curious and slightly unexpected observation is that some villa owners would close off entire sections of their homes during winter, effectively shrinking the living space to conserve heat and resources. You imagine the rest of the house now. Rooms left unused. Doors closed. Spaces allowed to grow cold so that others can remain livable. You stand again and move toward a side doorway. Outside beyond the main structure you see smaller buildings. Simpler, more exposed. These spaces where workers live. You step closer. The difference is immediate. The walls are thinner, the space is smaller, the fires weaker. The cold feels closer again. You pause at the threshold. Here the balance shifts. Less controls, less controls. More endurance. You watch as someone inside adjusts a small fire, their movements careful, their resources limited. The warmth they create is smaller, more fragile, but no less important. You step back slightly. The contrast is clear. Within the same estate, winter is experienced in different ways, not because of the cold changes, but because access does. You return toward the main villa, feeling the warmth grow slightly stronger again as you move closer to its walls. You step back inside. The hearth still burns. The space still holds. You sit once more, and as you do, you begin to understand something that has been building quietly throughout your journey. Winter in the Roman world is not a single experience. It is shaped by where you are, what you have, and how much control that you can exert over your surroundings. You extend your hands toward the fire again, feeling its steady warmth settle into you. Here it is easier to maintain, easier to rely on, but still not effortless. You glance once more toward the doorway leading outside. The fields remain still, the cold remains constant, and inside small, deliberate efforts continue to hold it back. Just enough. You sit by the villa hearth for a while, letting its steady warmth settle into your hands, your shoulders, your breathing, and gradually your attention begins to shift again. Because even here where the fire burns more generously, there is something behind it all that you have not yet fully seen. The fuel. You glance towards the stack of wood nearby, carefully arranged, cut to size, dried, ready. It does not feel accidental. It feels prepared. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that fuel such as firewood and charcoal was essential for heating in the Roman world, and securing enough of it for winter required planning well in advance, especially in regions where demand was high. You stand and move closer to the pile. The pieces vary in size, some thicker meant to burn longer, others smaller used to start or sustain the fire. You pick one up, turning it slowly in your hands. It's lighter than it looks, dry, ready to burn. You set it back carefully. Nothing here is wasted. A lesser known detail is that charcoal, often produced by slowly burning wood in low oxygen conditions, was highly valued because it burned hotter and more steadily than raw wood, making it especially useful for indoor heating and cooking. You glance toward the hearth again. The fire shifts as another piece is added, the flames responding briefly before settling back into their steady rhythm. The warmth grows slightly, then stabilizes. It's not just about having fuel, it is about how you use it. You step back watching. Each piece is placed with intention. Not too much at once, not too little, enough to maintain the fire without exhausting the supply too quickly. Because winter is long, and fuel must last. Historians still debate how severe fuel shortages were in certain parts of the Roman Empire, particularly in densely populated urban areas where demand often exceeded local supply. You think back to the insula, the smaller fire, the careful additions, the way each piece of charcoal was treated as something valuable. Here in the villa there is more, but even here it is not endless. You move toward a side area where tools are stored, axes, bundles of gathered wood, signs of work done before the season fully set in. This warmth you are feeling now was prepared months ago, long before the cold arrived. You run your fingers lightly along one of the logs. Rough, solid. A quiet reminder that warmth begins far from the fire itself. A curious and slightly unexpected observation is that in some regions alternative fuels such as dried animal dung or agricultural waste were used when wood was scarce, providing a less efficient but still vital source of heat. You pause considering that. The idea shifts your understanding again. Warmth is not only about comfort, it is about resourcefulness. You step back towards the hearth. The fire continues unchanged in its rhythm, but now you see it differently. Not just as a source of heat, but as the result of effort planning and limitation. You sit once more. The warmth reaches you steady and familiar. You extend your hands toward them, but it's turning them slowly just as you have done before. But now there is a new awareness. Every moment of this warmth is being consumed, used, converted into comfort that cannot be stored. You glance around the room. The size of the space, the number of people, the placement of the fire, everything is part of the calculation. How much heat, how long it must last, where it is most needed. You think again of the insula, of the upper room where the brazier burned weakly, of the careful additions of charcoal, of the way people gathered closer because there was not enough to go around. And here you feel the contrast. More fuel, more control, but still the same principle. Nothing wasted. You shift slightly, letting your back rest more comfortably. The warmth settles deeper now. Not just physical, but understood. You glance toward the doorway again. Outside! Outside, the cold remains unchanged. The field's still quiet, the air still carrying that steady chill, and inside the fire continues to hold it back. Not completely, but enough. You take a slow breath, and you begin to understand something that ties all of this together. Surviving a Roman winter is not only about finding warmth, it is about maintaining it, protecting it, extending it across days and weeks and months. You look once more at the stack of wood, at the carefully measured fire, at the quiet rhythm of use and restraint, and you realize that every bit of warmth you have felt so far has come from this, from something that must be gathered, prepared, and consumed. You extend your hands toward the fire again. The heat brushes against your skin, familiar now, almost comforting, and for a moment you simply sit with it, aware, grateful, and just warm enough. You sit with the fire a little longer, watching the steady rise and fall of the flames until gradually your attention begins to drift beyond the physical world of wood and heat. Because winter is not only felt in the body, it settles into the mind as well. You lean back slightly, letting the warmth rest against your skin, and you begin to notice the quieter elements of the space around you. Small objects, subtle placements, things that do not directly create heat but still feel important. You glance toward a small household shrine set into the wall. It is simple. A few figures, offerings placed carefully, nothing elaborate but clearly maintained with intention. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that Roman households often honoured protective spirits known as lares and penates, believed to watch over the home and its well-being, including the safety and comfort of those living within it. You step closer. The air here feels no warmer than the rest of the room, and yet the space carries a different kind of presence. Not physical warmth, but something quieter. Reassurance. You notice how the offerings are arranged. Food, perhaps a small portion of what was cooked earlier, given back in a way. A lesser-known detail is that during colder months when survival felt more uncertain, some households increased their attention to these rituals, offering more frequent acknowledgements to the spirits they believed protected them. You pause. It is not about changing the temperature. It is about changing how the cold is experienced. You step back slightly, returning your gaze to the room as a whole. The fire still burns. The walls still hold their steady coolness. But now there is an added layer to the space, meaning historians still debate how deeply these beliefs influence daily behaviour versus serving as cultural tradition, but it is clear that they provided a sense of structure and comfort during times when control over the environment was limited. You move toward a doorway that leads into a quieter part of the house. The light is dimmer here, the sound softer. You notice small details, amulets, objects placed near entrances, simple marks or symbols near thresholds, each one subtle, each one intentional. A curious and slightly unexpected observation is that some Romans believed certain symbols or charms could ward off harmful influences, including illness or misfortune that might be more common during colder seasons. You run your fingers lightly along the edge of a doorway. The wood is cool, unchanged, and yet the space feels different because of what has been placed there. You take a slow breath. The air feels the same, but your awareness of it has shifted. You return toward the hearth, sitting once more near its steady warmth. The fire crackles softly, its presence constant. You watch it for a moment. The movement of the flames, the glow of the coals, and you begin to understand that this too carries meaning beyond its physical function. Fire is not only warmth, it is stability, continuity, a sign that life is being maintained. You rest your hands on your knees, letting the warmth settle into you again. Around you, the house remains calm. No urgency, no panic, just quiet continuation. You glance once more toward the small shrine. The offerings remain unchanged, and you realize something that feels both simple and profound. In a world where the cold cannot be fully controlled, people create other forms of security. Ritual, belief, routine, each one adding a layer of comfort that fire alone cannot provide. You shift slightly, feeling the warmth of the hearth steady your body. Your breathing slows. Your thoughts settle. The cold is still present. It always is. But it feels less overwhelming now, less intrusive. Less intrusive, because it is not faced alone. You look around the room once more. The objects, the fire, the quiet presence of others moving through their routines. Everything works together, not to eliminate the winter, but to make it livable. You exhale softly, and for a moment you simply sit with that understanding. Warmth in this world is not only physical, it is also something created through meaning, through shared belief, through the quiet assurance that even in the coldest moments there are things in place to help you endure. And as the fire continues its steady glow, you feel that assurance settle gently into the space around you. You remain near the hearth, letting that quiet sense of reassurance settle around you, until gradually your attention shifts again. Because even with all this care, all this preparation, winter still brings something else with it. A heaviness, a strain on the body that no amount of fabric or fire can completely prevent. You notice it first in the small details. A soft cough from across the room, a slower movement as someone rises, the way hands linger longer near the heat as if trying to draw out more than warmth alone. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that colder, damp conditions in ancient Rome often contributed to respiratory illnesses, joint pain, and general weakness, especially during the winter months when people spent more time indoors with limited ventilation. You sit a little straighter, listening. The sound is not alarming, but it is present, a reminder. You glance toward the doorway where the air moves gently, allowing just enough circulation to keep the space from becoming too heavy. Even so, the balance is difficult. Too much openness invites the cold, too little invites something else. You understand now how delicate that balance must be. A lesser-known detail is that Roman medical thought often linked health to the balance of bodily humours, with cold and damp conditions believed to increase certain imbalances that could lead to illness. You consider that? Not in the way a physician might, but in the way it reflects a deeper awareness that the environment affects the body in ways that are not always visible at first. You shift slightly closer to the fire. The warmth feels different now, not just comforting, but protective. Historians still debate how effective Roman medical practices were in treating winter-related illnesses, as many remedies were based on theory rather than empirical understanding, yet some approaches offered real, if limited, relief. You watch as someone prepares a small mixture, herbs, perhaps crushed or steeped. The scent rises faintly earthy and slightly bitter. You lean in just enough to notice it. It is not unpleasant, but it is not meant to be. It is meant to help. A curious and slightly unexpected observation is that warm drinks infused with herbs or spices were commonly used to soothe symptoms such as coughs or chills, providing both physical comfort and a sense of care. You imagine holding that cup, the warmth spreading through your hands, then inward easing, the tightness in your chest softening the edge of the cold. You take a slow breath. The air here is warmer than outside, but still carries a trace of dampness. It settles in the lungs, differently heavier, slower. You become aware of your own breathing, steady, but more noticeable. You glance around the room again. Movements are slightly slower now, not dramatically, just enough to see. You begin to understand that winter does not always bring sudden hardship. Sometimes it is gradual, a slow wearing down. You shift your shoulders, feeling a faint stiffness there. The kind that builds over time, not from a single moment, but from many small exposures to cold. You roll them gently. It helps, a little. You notice how others do the same. Small adjustments, stretching fingers, rubbing hands, keeping the body moving just enough to prevent it from settling into discomfort. You lean forward slightly, extending your hands toward the fire again. The warmth reaches you familiar now. Reliable, but not complete. It cannot fix everything, and that you realize is part of the reality of this season. Not every problem has a solution. Some can only be managed. You glance once more at the person with the herbs. They sip slowly, their posture easing just a little. Relief, not cure. You sit back again, letting your body rest. The fire continues its quiet work. The room remains balanced, and life continues within it even with these small signs of strain. You take another slow breath. The air moves in and out. The warmth stays where it can, and you begin to see that surviving a Roman winter is not only about staying warm, it is about staying well enough to continue. well enough to move through each day without being overwhelmed. You look around once more. The signs are subtle, but they are there, and they are understood. Without needing to be spoken, you rest your hands on your knees again, feeling the steady presence of the fire. It does what it can, and so do you, and together it is enough to carry you forward. You sit quietly with that awareness for a while, noticing how the body adjusts, how the space holds together, how everything continues despite the slow weight of the season, and then gradually something shifts. Not in the temperature, but in the atmosphere. A faint sound reaches you first. Laughter, soft at first, then growing slightly brighter, carried through the corridors in a way that feels different from the quiet rhythms you have grown used to. You turn your head slightly. Something is changing. You rise and follow the sound. It leads you back toward a larger room, one that feels more open, more alive. The fire burns a little brighter here. The light is warmer, and the air, though still cool at its edges, carries a different energy. People are gathered, not just sitting quietly, but moving, speaking, sharing. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that the Romans celebrated several festivals during the winter months, most famously Saturnalia, a period marked by feasting, gift-giving, and a temporary loosening of social norms. You step into the room. The difference is immediate. The cold has not disappeared, but it feels less important. You notice how people stand closer together, not just for warmth this time, but for connection. Voices overlap gently, movements are more animated. There is food again, more than before. Bread perhaps sweetened slightly. Small dishes passed from one hand to another, cups filled and refilled. A lesser-known detail is that during Saturnalia, it was common for traditional social roles to relax, with masters and servants sometimes sharing in the same celebration, creating a rare sense of equality, even if only briefly. You watch as a cup is handed across the room. No hesitation, no distance, just shared presence. You feel it in the air. Warmth not from fire alone, but from the gathering itself. Historians still debate how widespread and genuinely equal these role reversals were during Saturnalia, but there is little doubt that the festival provided a psychological break from the rigid structures of Roman life. You move closer to the fire. It burns steadily as always, but now it feels different. Not because the heat has changed, but because of everything surrounding it. A curious and slightly unexpected observation is that some Romans exchanged small symbolic gifts during winter festivals, simple objects that carried meaning more than material value, reinforcing bonds between people during the darker season. You notice a small object being passed between two people. It is simple, but it is received with care. You sit near the edge of the gathering. The warmth reaches you, but so does something else, a sense of lightness. The room feels fuller, not just in number, but in energy. The quiet endurance you have seen so far gives way for a moment to something softer, more open. You listen. The conversations are still calm, still measured, but there is a lift to them now, a gentle brightness that was not present before. You find yourself relaxing in a different way, not just physically, but mentally. The cold feels less pressing, not because it has gone, but because attention has shifted. You glance around once more. Faces are softer, movements easier. The body is still aware of the season, but it is no longer the only focus. You take a slow breath. The air carries warmth, food, voices, and something harder to name, a sense of shared time. You begin to understand why this matters. Winter is long, steady, unchanging, and moments like this break that rhythm. They remind you that the season does not define everything. You lean slightly closer to the fire. The warmth settles into you again, but this time it feels amplified. Not stronger, but supported. You rest your hands together, letting the heat gather between them, and for a while you simply remain there, listening, observing, letting the atmosphere carry you. The cold waits outside, it always does, but inside for this brief stretch of time something else takes its place. Connection. And as the evening continues, you begin to see that surviving a Roman winter is not only about managing the physical world, it is also about sustaining the spirit. Finding moments where the weight of the season lifts, even if only slightly. You glance once more at the people around you, the fire, the food, the shared space, and you understand. Warmth is not always something you create alone. Sometimes it grows between people, quietly, naturally, and just enough to carry everyone forward. You remain within that gentle brightness for a while, letting the voices and shared warmth carry you, until slowly, almost without noticing, the energy begins to settle again. The laughter softens, movements slow, the gathering loosens though the fire continues to burn steadily at the center. And as the moment fades, your attention begins to shift once more. Not toward a single room, but toward everything you have seen, because now the differences stand out more clearly than before. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that Roman society was deeply structured by class, with access to resources, comfort and protection varying greatly between the wealthy and the poor. In winter, those differences become even more visible. You sit quietly watching as people move through the space. Some rise easily, their clothing thick, well layered, their posture relaxed. Others linger closer to the fire, reluctant to step away from the warmth they may not find elsewhere. You recognize the pattern now. It has been present all along, in the villa, in the insula, in the barracks, in the quiet room where care was given. You shift slightly, feeling the warmth from the fire reach you again. The same fire, but not the same experience for everyone. A lesser-known detail is that wealthier Romans could afford not only better clothing and more fuel, but also more servants or labour to maintain fires, prepare food and manage living spaces, reducing their direct exposure to the cold. You glance toward the doorway. Beyond it, the night waits unchanged, carrying that same steady chill across every street, every field, every wall. The cold does not choose, but people do not face it equally. Historians still debate how sharply these differences were felt on a daily level, as cultural expectations and social norms shape how discomfort was expressed or accepted across classes. You think back to the insula, the thin walls, the limited fuel, the careful sharing of heat, then to the villa, the larger fire, the stored wood, the controlled spaces, and further still to the baths, that rare shared warmth that temporarily blurred the lines. You take a slow breath. The contrast is quiet, but undeniable. A curious and slightly unexpected observation is that even small advantages such as access to thicker textiles or slightly better insulated rooms could significantly change how an individual experienced winter over time. You look around again, at the layers of fabric, at the way people position themselves, at the subtle differences in how they move through the same space. Some remain near the fire out of need, others out of comfort. You begin to understand that winter reveals these differences more clearly than any other season, because it presses on everyone, and in doing so it shows who has the means to push back. You rest your hands together, feeling the warmth between them. It's the same warmth you have felt throughout your journey, from brazier, from hearth, from bath, but now it carries a different meaning. You realize that survival here is not just about knowledge, not just about habit. It is also about access. What you can gather, what you can store, what you can share. You glance once more at the fire. It burns steadily as always, but you know now that not every fire burns the same. Not every space holds warmth equally, and not every person has the same chance to remain comfortable within it. You lean back slightly, letting your shoulders rest. The room feels calm again. The brief brightness of the gathering has softened into something quieter, more reflective. You take another slow breath, and as you do, you begin to see the full picture. Roman winter survival is not a single story. It is many stories, layered together, some easier, some harder, all shaped by the same cold but experienced in very different ways. You close your eyes for a moment, letting that understanding settle. Then you open them again, looking once more at the fire, the people, the space that holds them all. And you realize something simple. The cold may be shared, but warmth is not always, and as the night continues, that truth lingers quietly in the air as steady as the season itself. You sit there a little longer, letting the quiet settle back into the room. The fire steady, the voices soft, the movement slowing into something almost still. And gradually your attention begins to drift outward once more, toward the season itself, because winter does not end in a single moment. It stretches, day after day, night after night. You begin to notice the light. It is subtle at first, a little less dim in the morning, a little longer in the afternoon. The change is not dramatic, but it is there. A widely accepted historical fact tells us that even in ancient Rome, the gradual lengthening of daylight after the winter solstice was observed and marked as a turning point, signalling that the harshest part of winter would eventually give way to spring. You step outside. The air still carries that familiar chill brushing against your face, slipping through the edges of your clothing. But something feels different. Not warmer, not yet, but softer. You walk slowly, your step steady, your breath calm. The streets are as they have been. People moving, fires burning, life continuing, but there is a quiet shift beneath it all. A sense of patience. A lesser-known detail is that agricultural life in the Roman world depended heavily on seasonal awareness, and even in winter, preparations for the coming spring would begin quietly shaping how people viewed the passing of the cold months. You glance toward the horizon. The sky holds a faint brightness even now. You pause for a moment. The cold remains, but it no longer feels endless. Historians still debate how consciously Romans perceived seasonal transitions on a daily level, but it is clear that the rhythm of the year shaped both practical life and emotional outlook in subtle but meaningful ways. You take the slow breath. The air moves in and out, steady and familiar. You think back. The stone floors, the braziers, the layered clothing, the beds, the kitchen, the baths, the crowded insula, the quiet villa, the soldiers in the cold northern wind, the careful care given to those most vulnerable, the shared warmth of gatherings. Each moment put to a larger whole. A curious and slightly unexpected observation is that endurance itself, the ability to continue through discomfort without constant resistance, was often valued in Roman culture as a quiet form of strength. You begin to feel that now, not as something forced, but as something learned. You draw your cloak a little closer, not out of urgency, but out of habit. Your body knows what to do. You continue walking. The cold is still there, but it feels different, less like something pressing against you. More like something you move through. You notice how your steps have changed since the beginning. More measured, more aware. You know where to stand, where to rest, how to hold warmth when you find it. You understand the rhythm now, and that understanding brings a kind of calm. You pause once more, letting your gaze settle on the quiet movement of the city. Smoke rises faintly from rooftops. Doors open and close. People continue their day. Winter is still present, but it is no longer overwhelming, because you know how to exist within it. You take one last slow breath. The air feels cool, but manageable. You turn back toward the house, towards the spaces you have come to understand. And as you step inside, the familiar rhythm greets you again. The fire, the fabric, the quiet movement of people continuing their lives. Everything as it has been, everything working together. You sit once more near the warmth, and this time you do not reach for it immediately. You simply let it be there, a steady presence. You close your eyes, the sounds soften, the air settles, and you allow yourself to rest in the understanding you have gathered. That survival here was never about escaping the cold. It was about learning how to live alongside it, patiently, carefully, one small moment at a time. You're breathing lows. Your body feels heavier, more relaxed. The fire continues its quiet glow. The world outside continues its steady rhythm, and you remain here in this calm space where everything is just enough. The cold does now disappear, but it no longer needs to, because you have found your place within it. And as the light slowly shifts and the season moves forward in its quiet, unhurried way, you feel that same gentle movement within yourself, slowing, softening, letting go. The warmth remains, the calm remains, and there is nothing more you need to do. Nothing more you need to hold on to. Just rest, just breathe, just drift, and let the quiet carry you gently into sleep. Sweet dreams.